The aftermath of capturing Saddam Hussein. Chris VanSant, Delta Force retired, private consultant, VanSant, LLC. On December 13th, 2003, Chris was a part of the Delta Force team that captured Saddam Hussein in Iraq. 20 years later, Chris is now a board member of the amazing All Secure Foundation run by Jen and Tom Sadlerly, also former Delta, allsecurefoundation.org. And watch out for the show coming with those two awesome people. Chris is a work in progress, and that compasses progress is in the right direction after a lot of setbacks and detours. Part of his mission now is to reduce the stigma of getting help for PTS, or post-traumatic stress, PTSD, mental health, and preventing veteran suicide, much like a former guest, Erick Miyares, is working towards. We spoke very openly about many chapters of his life, from joining the military, to selection, to the unit, aka Delta, transition to civilian life with traumatic brain injury, PTSD, depression, sleep disorders, and chemical dependency. Having navigated both traditional and non-traditional paths to recovery, Chris is an advocate for veteran mental health and wellness, veterans helping veterans, and finding ways to recover using the healing properties of outdoor pursuits. I loved hearing Chris speak about routine, exercise, nutrition, and outdoors being the keys to his recovery. We had a great chat about curing insomnia and fixing sleep routines so he could climb out of that dark, overwhelming place so many of us know of, or know others that are in or have been. Chris is a retired 20-plus year Special Operations veteran. His service includes time in the 75th Ranger Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division, 82nd Airborne Division, and 11 combat deployments as both a team member and team leader in 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. A lot easier to say Delta Force. During the latter part of his career, Chris was responsible for developing, procuring, and equipping the Army's Green Berets. Chris retired from the Army in 2015, at which point he transitioned to civilian life and became the Chief Operating Officer for TIR Tactical LLC. TIR is a US manufacturer of body armor, ballistic shields, tactical nylon products, clothing, and canine equipment. But in 2022, Chris moved on from TIR Tactical to start his own consulting company, VanSant LLC. Having spent nearly 27 years as an end user, combat developer, and manufacturer of combat equipment, he utilized that experience to provide defense-related businesses with product development, business development, and government acquisition consultation. So Chris's career as a consultant allows him to maintain a healthy work-life balance, pursue his passions, and support various veteran charitable endeavors. Overcoming many obstacles and sustaining numerous injuries throughout his military career, Chris's biggest challenge was overcoming his aforementioned hurdles. He and his wife, Robin, his life teammate, love that, support various veteran charitable causes, and it was an absolute pleasure speaking with him and bringing this amazing story to you, the listener. You can find Chris on Insta at, click the links in the show notes below, but if you're listening, it'll be C VanSant, all one word, so VANSANT 123 at Instagram. And his consulting company, VanSant LLC. And you can find out more about the All Secure Foundation, which we're all very passionate about, at allsecurefoundation.org. Thanks for watching. Hi, thanks for watching. I'm Damien Porter, former Special Forces operator, and check out my new project for 2023 at hownottodie.com.au, where I've combined all my Special Forces training and police officer experience to help others. Thanks for watching. And we're live. Welcome to the Straight Talk Mind and Muscle podcast, and welcome to my guest, Chris VanSant. Chris, great to see you. Thanks for having a chat just before.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. Thanks a lot.
Hey, I'm looking forward to it. You know, I've talked this up a little bit on the socials and for people that follow this show, but you were one of the team that captured Saddam Hussein.
let's talk through the unit that you're in, and then maybe talk through some of the things with the mission there. But that's quite a wild story, to be honest.
Yeah. So, I mean, typical military career kind of came up through the ranks. I was fairly fortunate. I had a good friend convince me to try out for, the United States Army Special Mission Unit at a very early age. It took me a couple tries, but I was successful. And then, yeah, very shortly after I got there, we were busy. I think 2 weeks out of school, I deployed to Afghanistan, came back from Afghanistan, and then we did the invasion of Iraq. And of course, we were chasing Saddam. Was one of our primary mission sets. And so, yeah, about 9 months later, we ended up finding him, catching him. The joke internally amongst the team that I was a part of was we were always one guy away from the man. So we the day before, so December 12th, 2003, we did a couple of assaults in Baghdad, pulled a guy out from under a bed, and turned out he was the guy that actually knew where Saddam was, which led to kind of the next day's operation of trying to go find him.
What a high-speed environment that you were in compared to maybe your training, because literally you're nabbing bad guys and getting the intel yourselves, and probably expanding that intel to hit the next mission.
Yeah, it was a very while we had joint effort, obviously we had intelligence collection from the various services, we had support from the various three-letter agencies in the United States, but it really boiled down to kind of our organization tracking down those leads and going after all those folks and putting the pieces together until eventually we got our guy.
And that's brilliant. I'm going to come and expand on that. I'm going to just wind back a little bit for the listeners, because we're from the same sort of same genre. But you talked about the United States Special Missions Unit, and I've got your bio here. You know, you've gone from 75th Ranger Regiment to 82nd Airborne, and so on and so on. Most people know the unit is Delta Force, and I know we've all got the different names that we actually use, but what does Delta do that you can speak of? And I'm never going to, in this show, Chris, put anything on the line for you, so just say you can't answer it, of course. But what does Delta do? What's the role of these supermen as people see them in the civilian world?
Yeah, so I mean, the primary mission is counterterrorism. Secondary would be hostage rescue in any case scenario, particularly overseas. Domestically, it would be the Federal Bureau of Investigation that would do things domestically, but anything international where there's U.S. citizens involved or U.S. interests involved, hostage rescue or counterterrorism related, that's the mission of the unit. Very closely formed, as was New Zealand SAS after the UK SAS, way back in 1977. The year prior to that, Charlie Beckwith, which was the first unit commander, did an exchange with 22 SAS in the UK and came back and basically took it on his shoulders as a colonel and said, look, we don't possess this capability within the United States, and I would like to stand it up. And people listened, and the unit was born.
His book, I read his book quite some years ago, Charlie Beckwith, and it was phenomenal. And it really showed, he was along the lines of David Sterling, in my opinion, who started, if you give the listeners, the Special Air Service. But he saw the lack of capability. He went and created it back in your country, in the United States. And I asked you that question because I've got to do some research. I listened to some of your interviews, and somebody asked the question about, SEAL Team 6 versus Delta. And again, I read Richard Marcinko's book, the creator of SEAL Team 6. Very different. And you can say pros and cons for both, but I'm biased towards Army and biased towards a brother up a unit, and I can see the selection course for Delta Force to be very different. That said, though, what you and Pat Mack both had to do it twice. I mean, he snapped his ankle on like day 2. What was it like, the selection process there for you? You've already come through some crucibles as it was.
Yeah, interesting. I was young. I was very young. I was 23, and I guess I kind of knew, but also knew nothing about what I was getting myself into. The difference between unit selection and a lot of others, much like SAS in the UK, is it's an individual event. You are asked to complete a series of tasks, land navigation being the medium that they use predominantly, but you're not given a standard. You're not told how fast or how slow, or it's basically move A to B. And you have to rely on your own abilities to get you from A to B, and you have to move as fast as you can, knowing that you have to be able to sustain that movement for an undetermined amount of time. I think it's a true test of the individual and of your mindset and mentality and your ability to push through difficulty. But yeah, it's a head game at the best level. And I think it produces people that are capable of approaching and taking on any task successfully.
That is a brilliant descriptor of it, Chris. And I've interviewed a lot of different guys. I interviewed Dr. Dan Pronk, who was the regimental doctor for SASR. Again, for the listeners, Australian Special Air Service. But interestingly enough, he'd actually passed selection, so he knew both sides. And it is that mental game. You've really summed it up so well there. That brings me to my next question then. Again, we're not actually supermen. We're just people that can get the job done, and we're not. We always win, because you said you had to do it twice, or a couple of times, is the quote, and Pat had to do it. So, what is the mindset like for you? You failed selection first time, and you're going to go do it again. Something that the people can learn from about maybe tenacity or perseverance and so on.
Yeah, I think being a bit of a realist. I was just a regular kid. For listeners from the U.S., like I grew up in Dover, Delaware, a little small state, small town on the Mid-Atlantic region and the East Coast of the United States. I was a fairly decent athlete, but I wasn't physically imposing. I wasn't a big guy. I was a skinny little kid, kind of from a rural state. I think it's really a lesson in perseverance. It's continuing to pick yourself back up and not let little defeats beat you down. I think most people can be successful if they have the stick to itness to continue to go after their passions or their pursuits or whatever their objective is over and over again. I think it's in all of us. I think I'm a good example. Like I said, I tell people all the time, like I was just a regular guy. It took me multiple times to do almost everything that I did in my military career. But I think just that mindset of I'm not going to give up and I'm not going to be denied. And I believe in myself. I think that self-belief, that practicing, that training, that working to get better, to identify your flaws, your weaknesses, and improve on those daily, I think is how you're successful.
Absolutely. That self-reflection is amazing. And how brutal were we at that on the teams with each other? Not so much self-reflection, but reflection on each other as well. But we're just brutally honest so that we could improve as a team the next day, and so on and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, throughout my career, I think I learned more from failure than I ever learned from success. I think having something negative happen or something not go the way that I wanted, personally, and looking back on it, I view all those as valuable lessons learned and all contributing factors that made me successful later on and make me successful in present day.
Absolutely. There's a quote I often use, which is, I never lose, I either win or I learn.
Yeah, exactly. I like, one of my favorites is, a winner is just a loser that tried one more time.
Oh, wow. I love that. Yeah, love it. Yeah. I don't know who I was speaking to or listening to, sorry, about a selection course, and literally one guy gave up 200 meters from the end. He didn't know the end was there. As you said, you know how far you got to go. And he's like, well, you can't make it in if you're not prepared to go that little bit further. And that's the
right.
point.
Absolutely.
So that sums up Delta a little bit, and a little bit of your foray into there. That I needed to set that up because you guys did an amazing mission capturing Saddam Hussein. So I'm going to ask you some interesting questions there. And also, I sort of crowdsourced some questions. I thought, well, not many people will get to speak to this guy. So let's ask some questions. Some of them are funny and some of them are interesting. Lorianne asked, was it him or a double?
It was him. I mean, I didn't pull him out of the hole personally, but I can tell you I saw him when we got back, and it was absolutely him. There was no doubt.
Awesome. This one's let's see. How did from Corey, how did the capture of Saddam Hussein impact the unit and the broader military campaign in Iraq? And I guess maybe what he's getting at there is, you guys were relatively focused on Saddam for the conquering of the country and capturing that guy, but things changed after that. How did that impact?
Yeah, I think collectively we all felt like, so we had two primary missions. One was identify and locate weapons of mass destruction, of which we were unsuccessful. There were chemical weapons and other things found in Iraq after that, but our initial push did not uncover any. And the second was to capture Saddam Hussein. We did that, and jokingly, in the celebration afterwards, we all kind of joked and went, so do we get to go home now? The reality was no, the battlefield had changed and things were different, and we went out literally and did an assault the very next day. And then post capture, things really shifted, but it wasn't an immediate thing. It wasn't like we unseated a dictator of a country and then the insurgency began. The insurgency began months before that. And I've said on other venues, the very first time we saw foreign fighters in Iraq, which was Islamic extremists coming to Iraq with the specific intent of killing American or coalition forces. And the first time we saw that, me personally, was Halloween, was October 31st of 2003. And we didn't catch Saddam for another couple months after that. So yeah, there was definitely a shift. And I think when that shift happened, we realized we're probably going to be here for a long time. We're probably going to have a lot to do for a long time. And I know for me personally, and probably the consensus, although, everybody sees better years later, but at the time, I think we all kind of felt like better here than on our home soil. So we were comfortable with what we were asked to do, and we continued to do so.
It's a nice answer, especially towards the end there, contextualizing it. I interviewed Heston Russell, a major for 2 Commando Regiment over here last year. And I don't normally do war stories with our chats. Sergeant Major John McPhee's teaching me psychology, a whole bunch of other funky stuff.
Of course he is.
Yeah, exactly. So I decided to ask Heston this question because he spoke about it a little bit. He's seen true evil, and I asked him to explain that. And the reason I'm contextualizing this part is, you captured Saddam Hussein. Technically, the country's liberated, but day by day, person by person, you guys are dealing with evil people, true evil that most of us would never comprehend or could even envision. So I guess that's part of what you're doing there versus the big political side of things. I mean, weapons mass destruction and is the evasion legal? But on the ground, like I said, you'd rather hit them there than have that evil in somebody's home country.
Yeah, I think people misunderstand because they don't have a frame of reference. I don't think I don't even know how to explain it in layman's terms, but I guess when a person is willing to blow themselves up to bring harm to you or those like you, that's a special type of evil. And me personally, and I still feel this way today, if I can be of assistance in blocking, stopping, or removing that evil from the world, then I'm doing a good thing. And so you know, as an operator, as a guy at the pointy end, as you know, I think we focus on the right now. We don't think about, you know, the big hierarchy. We have a job to do, and we know how important and how necessary that is. We know how much we matter to the people on our left and our right, and that's why we do what we do.
That's a great answer. The next one is from Craig. Now let me see through this. He wants to ask about other declassified missions that you're a part of. What's the sort of time frame for notification, and where you're located? So, okay. So what he's talking about is if you're in country, back in the States, is there any declassified missions you can speak to, and how much notice did you get, and where were you located? I guess he's talking about the pager going off back in the day.
Yeah. I can tell you that happened to me twice in my career. You know, 24 hours or less, we need to be someplace. I can't talk about what it was, and I can't talk about how it's done, just out of respect for the organizations. You know, a lot of things have changed rules wise with classification and not classification. I always joke, well, I say I joke, but it's not a joke. I mean, when President Obama came out and said SEAL Team 6 was responsible for the killing of Osama bin Laden, the game changed. That was acknowledgement of one of the 2 tier 1 assets in the United States. And some rules had to be rewritten, and nobody likes to talk about that, but they were, because of that action. And whether you agree or disagree with it, I personally am not comfortable talking about the how and the where and the why, or how quickly we could do something.
Absolutely. Well, this one's interesting. This is from a friend of mine, not just someone else in the public. Todd asked, and he was an operator as well, what were the differences, if any, in your own expectations versus reality of the man you captured?
Oh, that's a good one. So, you know, so that night was a 2-target assault. My team, like I said, we captured the guy that gave him up the day prior, and so we went up there. Our sister troop at the time, it was their local AO up in the Tikrit area. So they had the primary objective pick, and they picked the farm. We ended up with the secondary, which was Saddam's personal chef's house in town. And so that's where I was. And then we obviously recovered the chef. We had hit the wrong farm initially based on intelligence, and then shifted over one based on the intelligence we collected during those 2 assaults. And then we ended up getting him. So I didn't see him until we had gotten back to our temporary holding facility on the base that we were operating out of in Tikrit. I will tell you that when he was brought out from the detention room that he was being held in, he was going to be walked from there to the aircraft, and then, you know, placed on a Black Hawk helicopter and flown to Baghdad. And right before he walked out into the room where we all were, because one of the things they did for us was they allowed us all to be in the room. So everybody that was a part of the operation and had been a part of all the operations leading up to that were sort of in this one little open hall in a building we were in on the base in Tikrit.
Yep.
And before they walked Saddam out, he actually shook the guy that was walking him out, shook his arm so he would stop for a second. And he cleaned himself up. So as disheveled as he was, he understood his position as the leader of that country and the fact that he had been captured. And he wanted to, within his limited scope, look the best that he could and look like, you know, the dictator or the president of Iraq that he was.
Yeah.
And so in that respect, I think that made me feel like he's exactly who we thought he was.
Yeah.
He was a very narcissistic, I'm the man kind of guy,
Yeah.
that had ruled with an iron fist for a ton of years. And his days were over. But I think even in that moment of capture where he could have just folded into himself, he still took the time to sort of present himself as who he thought he was. And so from that standpoint, I think he's exactly who we thought he was.
Wow. Wow. That sense of entitlement is big.
Yeah.
Well, that sort of covers off the Saddam Hussein thing. So thank you for discussing that, Chris. We've talked through the unit and what that entailed and some of the things you've done. Now, we're in a completely different space. I mean, you've done 20 years in the military there. Let's talk through transition. And I think it was probably John McPhee that made me start to learn about what that word was. I joked with someone the other day, you leave work on the Friday and you start your new job on the Monday, and that's your transition done. Transitioning out of the unit into where you are now, you've obviously got a journey. We're going to talk about that. But how did that start for you? What was your intent? What was the plan, and how did it go?
Not well. Yeah. So
I'm sorry.
mine
Didn't mean to throw you under the bus.
That's all right. No, that's all right. Like it's part of the journey, man. So I don't have a problem talking about it. Um, when I left the unit, I left not of my own choice. And I had about 5 years left in the Army.
Oh wow.
Honestly, things had caught up to me. 11 combat deployments and a bunch of time away had really sort of taken its toll on me. You combine that with loss and injury, and you can find yourself a bit different than you were when you started the process, I guess.
Yeah.
And so when I left the unit in particular, that was a really rough time for me. It was a huge identity crisis. You're leaving an organization, you're leaving a profession where that's all you ever wanted to do. Like everything about you was to get you to that point. And then when you got to that point, slowly but surely it encompassed your entire life. So it was your identity. So that loss of identity was incredibly difficult. For me personally, when that happened, I think the combination of loss of identity and what do I do now, and then the toll of warfare and losing friends and post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury and a bunch of stuff sustained over the years, for me personally put me in a dark place. And I talk about it candidly, because well, that's exactly why I do this, is because I want people to hear that and know that it's okay to feel that way, and you can come out on the other side of it. But you got to pay attention to it, you got to acknowledge it, and you got to be unafraid to discuss it and to get help. And so to make a long story short, I had a sort of a 2-year spin where drugs and alcohol were involved, and severe depression, and I was an insomniac and didn't sleep, and got to the point of almost taking my own life. And it's a very real thing. It's a very real thing. Even more so, you're epitomized as a strong and accomplished person that has achieved all these things. And then when you feel like you're not worth any of that and you don't know where you belong and what do I do now? That's a pretty overwhelming emotion. And it takes probably more to get through that than it did to do anything you've done in your life. But
you're not the first person to say that at all, Chris. Nick Caldwell, SASR here, same thing. He said, I'll try and get the quote right. My brain's with a few brain cells I got left after the last few days of fever. I think he said, transition is the hardest thing I've done in my life, even more than war.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree with that. I personally, I got lucky. For a myriad of reasons. I had some good friends and loved ones that convinced me to get some help, to seek some professional help and get a diagnosis, which for me, and I preach that all the time to guys, like, go see someone and get a diagnosis, because the difference between feeling like I don't know why I feel like this and then having a medical professional tell you you have this, and this going on, and that is what's contributing to why you feel like this, that epiphany, that insight is key to getting yourself back on the right path. And so I'm fortunate in that I had that. The second thing is I had time left in the Army. So I ended up transitioning into a job where I was doing equipment development and acquisition for Special Forces Command, which gave me an entirely new set of skills that helped prepare me for life after. But it also surrounded me with a bunch of guys that were just like me, guys that had been deployed for countless combat deployments, that had suffered some of the same injuries and stressors. And we were kind of this collective little group where we could rely on each other, we could communicate with each other. And looking back, hindsight, I think all of that was instrumental to me being able to retire and get out of the Army and be okay, or on the path to okay.
Yeah, brilliant.
So when I finally retired, I was ready. I'd had 5 years of hard work and recovery, sort of getting back to normal, for lack of a better term. But I was ready for the next chapter. I was ready for the next challenge. I was ready to move on to something else.
Yeah, I like that, the next chapter. And that seems to be a common thread with operators, the 5-year mark, 2 to 5 years, getting it together and forward planning while you're actually still employed in the military. You mentioned about possibly taking your own life. You mentioned about the depression and all those things. I interviewed Erick Miyares, really interesting cat, special mission unit guy as well, but not from the 2 ones that we've spoken about today. But his mission now is brilliant, is preventing veteran suicide. And we had a great chat talking about, if I blow my rotator cuff, if I blow my bicep tendon, hey, we're going to go down and start to get things fixed. And we want to change that to the same for the brain. Like, one of the guys, he's not doing so good, he's going off the rails a little bit like you were. If we notice that, take that stigma away and go, well, let's go get that fixed. And like you said, the diagnosis for us sort of logical guys, or crayon guys, I like to call us, then that helps so much. It's got to take a mind shift. And funnily enough, some of the top researchers say that in the next couple of years, there's going to be people like yourself, Chris, that then go away and qualify maybe as psychs and other things, that they're going to help the most. We can't have a 23-year-old civilian psychologist help us out. It's actually going to be people that have been there and been through it.
Yeah, I mean, what Erick's doing is great. And spreading that message. He and a lot of other guys, it's why we do podcasts, frankly. It's why we talk about it. And we all sort of talk behind the scenes, and cheer each other on and say, hey man, it's cool, get out there and talk about it. The thing that I like to say, and usually I relate it, you said something there that keyed it up for me. Usually I relate it to transition, and I say, the things that made you great at what you did in the service are the same things that'll make you great at what you choose to do next. Well, that next thing could be your own recovery.
Yeah.
You worked so hard to be competent and efficient and as good as you could be at whatever your job was in the service. You can work that hard again to recover. But you got to do the same things. You gotta get help. You got to get smarter on it. You have to understand it. You have to understand how to train through it and how to work through your deficiencies to correct those and be more effective. And so it's the same thing. And I don't know what you said in there that keyed it, but yeah, I mean, the same tools that you use to be everything that you were and whatever you did in the military are the same tools you can use to recover, and the same tools you can apply to the career number 2.
That's amazing that you said that. I spoke about Dr. Dan Pronk earlier. So he was didn't become an operator, but he passed selection, he was a doctor before he did that, and did a lot of combat deployment, and saw action himself, pulled the trigger beside the guys, and then had to try and save their lives. But he did exactly that. And so many of us say we got into that dark place, and he said he got a bit wobbly. Long story short, his brother, who was an officer in the SASR, and the former commanding officer of SASR, they've written a book called Resilience Shield. Basically, he went, I'm not going so good here. This doesn't make sense. I'm highly motivated. I'm paid well now out of the military, and there's no stress. why have I fallen over? And he reverse engineered, just using those same skills that we always would have done, to go, right, what is resilience? Why am I falling over when I can go on a combat operation and be 100% effective? So what a great explanation of what we need to do. It's really clever that you said that, Chris.
Yeah, no, it really is. Yeah, I mean, it's an everyday event, right? And I think the thing that people get confused is they feel overwhelmed, right? And instead of breaking it down step by step, like you've done everything throughout the course of your military career, it's routine. It's wake up and have a routine. It's planning. It's execution. It's talking about what you did, how you did it, what you did wrong, what you can do better. It's that after action review. I think that those things that we take for granted, that are bred and taught to us in the military, I think you take for granted how effective they are at dealing with any of life's challenges down the road.
My mind's exploding because literally there's a chapter in his book called After Action Review. Oh, that's awesome. Just going back to the TBI, and I didn't ask what your role was in Delta. Maybe we should just cover that off a little bit. So on our team, a team of 4, and there's a certain number of those as well. My job was method of entry. You probably call them breaches in the States and so on, but my job was to open anything, any means possible. Were you a medic? Were you MOE?
No, yeah. So I was an insulter for the predominance of my career, but I was also the team breacher for way too long. I think I breached steady for about 3.5 years in combat. And so me personally, like, my traumatic brain injury is a result of repeated exposure to low level blast. While I've had a number of concussive events in my life, I truly believe that it's that repeated exposure to low level blast that contributed to my issues. And it was just, whether you're in training or you're overseas, it was breach after breach after breach after breach after breach. And as well as I do, we knew safe distances for net explosive weight. We knew how far you had to be away from a certain poundage of explosives so that you didn't collapse a lung. But we knew nothing about how close you could be without rupturing capillaries in the brain. And I think I'm hopeful and optimistic that the research will continue. I think sometimes the situation warrants accepting some of those consequences, and I think you would probably agree with me that we'd probably still do things just like we did before, because it was necessary for the preservation of our own or someone else's life. But yeah, I hope the studies continue, and yeah, mine, like yours, I'm sure, was cumulative from low level blast.
Yeah, you don't understand that when you're in there having, to be honest, having fun, and you're with your team and you're smashing doors and walls. The reason I bring that up is Joe Detours, or Commander Joe Detours. I don't know if you know him. Interviewed him last year. I can't remember he's employed by SOCOM, I'd suggest. Anyway, he's invented a cure. He created a cure for TBI, and for acute and chronic. And he actually did it out of personal need. He rolled a car, gave himself massive TBI. This guy was like he's a doctor and a scientist presenting to Congress. He's a pretty smart dude. I found it quite hard to keep up with him during the show. But he went, well, he's got this massive TBI. What can I do? Long story short, he went, if I throw these 7 things at it and see which sticks, and none of them hurt you, it's not like an antidepressant drug that could hurt you and so on. He threw these things at it, a cocktail of it, of low-level hyperbaric chamber, like about 1.5, because too much suppresses the blood flow, but all of them were there to promote more blood flow through the brain. And when I interviewed him, the study was still ongoing. And then after that, the study proved that they can cure TBI. I connected a lot of the guys with him, connected DJ Shipley, who's been on the show with GBRS. Again, another breacher. He's got some stories about breaching close that you, yeah, unbelievable. But it's, yeah, he's really come leaps and bounds with curing TBI, and I don't use that word lightly at all. So maybe I'll connect you with him so you can have a look at some of the research. But it's so helpful for people like us through so many low-level concussions. Maybe not operators. You know, we know that athletes. We've talked about. I've talked with the rugby coaches and things, All Black coaches. They all go through those concussive events, and they are cumulative, and they hit us later on.
Yeah, I would love anything. I love research. I love looking at any of that data. I love talking to anybody that's taken steps towards helping out. Me in particular, and I know I'm not alone in this. I'm kind of an interesting situation in that the current way that they do brain imaging is with MRI based machines, which utilizes magnets. I have shrapnel in my body in a few different places.
Oh wow!
I can't have MRIs. So honestly, the places that I have it, I wouldn't worry about it, but I have a piece of shrapnel in my left eye that sits in the back of my eye next to my optic nerve. And so when that injury occurred, I was told you can never have an MRI for the rest of your life. Like, make sure your friends and family know.
Yeah,
So if you're ever incapacitated, they don't ever try and do that, because you will lose your vision in your left eye if that thing moves even the smallest amount. And so I'm hopeful. It's frustrating when you're that person. Frustrating, but at the same time, I think rather than medicinal or science based things, it caused me to pursue holistic type treatments. And for me personally, that was routine, that was exercise, that was diet, that was spending time in the outdoors, that was doing things that honestly make me feel better. But yeah, I'm on board, man. I would support anything and everything TBI related in terms of research to figure out, because we know so little about the brain. Like you said, even when you talk to somebody that's really smart and they make us feel really dumb talking to them, even if you understand what they're saying, you realize that we just don't know enough about the brain.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I love that you said routine, exercise, nutrition, and the outdoors. I mean, what that's just called nature, and you said holistic, and it amazes me that people of our genre, and I like to think we are fairly educated. We can look at things through some good filters. And again, harking back to John McPhee, who cracks me up because, like, he's a sergeant major, and the sergeant majors, you got to listen to those guys. They've been around. They're normally pretty snarky, but he's been and seen a few things, and he's like, in his way, he's telling the story. He's like, I think drinking and exercise and food, that's 80% of your problem right there for these people that are messed up. And he's talking from a practical perspective of depression and mental health, and it's super important to have those things right. Routine alone will help a ton, but that does tangent us to what you went through, chemical dependency and that sleep disorder and things. How did you come out the other side? What were some of the things you helped you?
Yeah. Well, I don't take drugs very often.
Good man.
Yeah, I had an odd experience. So at sort of my lowest point, as I said, I dealt with a near suicide and some other things kind of in my worst times. And we're talking about over 10 years ago. That was 2010.
Yeah.
I'm many levels removed from where I was then, but at the time, I sought professional help, and at the time, the answer for most mental health professionals was medication.
Wow.
And so I was prescribed some things. And I've told this story before, but when they put you on head meds, I guess it depends on what it is and depends on how severe your conditions, but you feel better. They work. The trials that have been conducted with those drugs, yeah, you do feel better. The problem is it's a Band-Aid. It's a Band-Aid fix. It's no different to me. It's no different than alcohol or or marijuana or whatever,
Risky behavior, all the things that put us back in that fight and flight, and maybe give us that little escape.
Correct. And in my particular case, I probably would have continued on, and I would probably still be on those medications today, but I had a mishap happen. I had a pharmacy make an error and quadruple my dosage of the particular drug that I was prescribed. And the amount, the milligrams that I was ingesting of that particular drug by pure accident, I could have killed myself, or I could have killed a whole lot of people.
Wow.
And I got lucky and had somebody near me that forced me to call the doc that was treating me, and we had a quick conversation. He very quickly diagnosed that I had been overprescribed my dosage. But I wrote off head meds after that, and I said, this is not how I'm going to do it. I'm gonna find another way. And when I retired in 2015, my wife and I went for a hike. We hiked John Muir Trail in California. We did 211 miles in the wilderness, 3 weeks, unsupported, didn't cross a road for 3 weeks, just in the wilderness, waking up when the sun comes up, going to sleep when the sun goes down, physically exhausting ourselves every day. And that 3-week event cured my insomnia. It gave me time, space, and comfortable mindset to be able to discuss and think about things that I had carried around for years and that were really troubling to me. And that's loss of friends and loss of life. That's things that have happened. That's injuries. That's identity. That's a whole bunch of stuff. But it allowed me to process those things in a healthy environment without drugs or alcohol, without anything Band-Aid fixing that stuff. And for me, the light bulb went off. I went, man, I feel this good out here doing this. It's a healthy pursuit. It's good for me. It's enjoyable. What if I build this into my normal routine? It doesn't mean that you can run away for 3 weeks whenever you want. But you can have goals and do that multiple times a year. You can do it in smaller stints.
Yep.
And I'll tell you, Damien, it still works to this day. And I'll preach that to anybody that'll listen. I'm not a go to church guy, but I am a spiritual person. And my wife and I always say, like, the backcountry is our church. Like, those are the cathedrals of nature are where we find spirituality and healing, and it absolutely works.
Yeah, right on. That's phenomenal, and it's backed by science too. Chris, I'm not sure if you've seen it, but I've been working with sleep stress clients for a long time. I don't do it so much now. I push another thing, but there was a study done on major insomniacs, and these people hadn't slept for like 20 years. The group of, I think, 11 from memory, took them out to the woods, as you say in the States, and 2 weeks they went out, and it obviously just natural light, just like you did, no tech. And long story short, within, I think, 11 days, all of them 100% cured insomnia.
I have no doubt. I was 20 years. I can't even imagine. I don't know. I probably would have taken my own life if I had 20 years of insomnia. I spent about 5.5 as a true insomniac, where, I'd sleep maybe an hour and a half a night, and then it would catch up, and then I would oversleep for a bunch of hours. Like, it was this horrible existence. It was horrible for my body, horrible for my health. I gained weight. I felt bad all the time. That trip, that 3 weeks, and it's funny that you said 11 days, because I think if someone were to ask me, I would say you got to go for about 10 days. You got to get out there for about 10 days to truly reset that, what do they call it, circadian rhythm within your body. But I tell you what, doing that, getting better while I was out there, and then coming home and then focusing on a healthy routine. That I have maintained that. There's been a couple of little times, and when I say little times, there's been a couple of little relapses where I have one night where I can't go to sleep. And my wife will tell you, like, I stress out because I fear what that felt like so bad that I'm like, oh, we got to take a trip. Like, we got to go reset. But it absolutely, anecdotally, it absolutely works. And again, I say that to everybody. So I think it's awesome. I think they should do some more studies on that, and it should be promoted before we medicate somebody to fix that issue.
Hell yes. A friend of mine, Dr. Kirk Parsley, I don't know if you've heard of him. He was a SEAL, left the SEALs, became a doctor, went back as their SEAL doctor. Actually, right now, you probably are aware he's with Andy Stumpf and Mike Glover.
Oh,
and all
doing
those
the
guys.
jumps. Yeah,
Yeah.
They did.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
they got two down. Yeah.
Oh, wow. This morning, all I was doing was checking out the emails for you and getting this set. So I saw the Antarctica jump yesterday. So they got
Yeah,
two
they
now.
jumped in Antarctica, and they jumped in South America, and they're on their way to Miami for the next continent. So yeah, they're moving along. Good for those guys, man. That's awesome.
Awesome. Yeah, they're coming here in the second last stop. So that'd be great to see them. He's a sleep specialist, and he developed a sleep formula to get the guys off their sleep drugs. And one of the things you said there, you put on weight and your body didn't. I can't quite remember your quote, but your body wasn't really working so good. One of the guys he got the sleep right on. After 2 years, he quintupled his testosterone levels, and his foot, quintupled. That doesn't mean that he became a superhuman. It meant that he was so undernourished beforehand, so much in a deficit. But long story short, in his 40s, he's now doing PBs on his runs and lifts, and he's in great shape compared to as a hard charging, don't have to sleeps for the week, warrior.
Yep. Yeah, no, sleep is, I firmly believe it's one of the most critical things in your life. I think everybody needs a different amount. And I don't know what the science is behind it, but my wife, she needs more hours than I do to feel good and function every day.
Yep.
I think as you get older, you start to realize what that is.
Yep.
But yeah, absolutely critical. If anybody listening has a sleep disorder or a sleep problem, go see somebody, find out, do you have sleep apnea? Do you have any other type of issue contributing to that? And if you don't, I would encourage them to explore some nature-based solutions before you take sleep meds, because sleep meds is just like I said, it's another Band-Aid.
Yeah.
And when you take them for enough years, they don't work. You're not getting effective sleep when you do it. And then you start mixing them with things because you want them to be effective. And it's just a downward spiral that I don't recommend to anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is more for the listeners. I'm sure I'm preaching the choir with you. For those listening, sleep meds and alcohol, there's 4 stages of sleep, and we could use fancy words, but let's just say you're lying in bed thinking about sleep, you're twitching, and then you're going to deep sleep, these 2 here. All that sleeping pills do and alcohol does is they make you go unconscious. They just put you unconscious. There's no regenerative sleep. You're not sleeping. You're just not awake. Now, just finishing off in Kirk, he says it's so hard to sell sleep. He doesn't know why, but it's so important to us, but it's so hard to get people to do it. But I love helping people out. I love that you said how important it was. For me personally, when I was in those dark places and I didn't think I needed help, I focused for 2 months of getting that sleep right, and that was another stepping stone. It was another taking a handbrake off or taking off one of those weights holding you back that helped me out a ton.
Yeah, besides that's why I love being out in nature. Like you particularly if you're hiking or climbing or skiing or whatever, you're up when the sun comes up because you're outside.
Yeah.
And then you physically exert yourself throughout the day. So you're getting healthy exercise. Hopefully you're feeding and nourishing your body the way that you should. So when the sun goes down, you just want to go to sleep. Like there's no television, there's no cell phone, there's no distractors to pull at you. So it's almost like a forcing function to train yourself how to shut down and get proper sleep.
Now, I know you spoke in another show about your partner, and you introduced her to expeditions, to going outside. Same thing when I took Jess into the wild. She's like, "Oh, what are we going to be doing after dinner?" you're not going to be doing much because there's not much light. And I'm having a laugh, and then next thing you know, 8:30, she's crashed out.
No doubt. Yeah. Yeah. No, my wife, Robin, similar. She had, I had a lifetime, a career of doing things outdoor skiing and climbing, and was on a climbing team for a number of years. So learned some skills in the military, but my wife had never really done any of that. And I was lucky in that I introduced her to it, and I did it in a very healthy way, kind of small things, and then progressively more epic stuff where she got to really draw a lot of enjoyment from it, and she fell in love with it. And I think that's important. I think your partner, people forget, like your spouse, your partner, whatever, particularly for guys in the military, you had teammates for years that you counted on. When you were having a bad day, they picked you up or kicked you in the ass and motivated you to kind of keep going. And your spouse is just your life teammate. Like that's that person that's by your side and with you forever. So if you're fortunate enough or lucky enough to find hobbies or healthy pursuits that you can do with your spouse or your significant other, you got a leg up, man, because that's the path to success.
Yeah, absolutely. That a problem shared is a problem halved, and I love that quote, and I'm going to use that one. Your spouse is your life teammate, 100%. Let's talk about All Secure Foundation. Jen and Tom Satterley, who I was supposed to have on yesterday, apparently, but I was literally horizontal and incoherent. So they're coming up soon. You're on the board there for All Secure. Can you just maybe give us an overview of that? Because I watched a video on them about a year and a half ago, and it was, guys coming in to the retreat, guys that have been on alcohol and drug dependency, and I was just blown away. These guys have something, I think, quite unique and very, very efficacious.
They really do. Yeah. So Tom was, obviously he was a Delta Force veteran. He was a Black Hawk Down era. He was in Somalia in '93. He was one of my instructors when I went through the operator training course. And then he was one of my early troop sergeant majors, and actually my troop sergeant major on the deployments where we captured Saddam.
Oh, wow.
So I've known Tom a long time. When he wrote a book of the same name, All Secure, and it originally had reached out to me and asked basically if I would have a conversation with the guy about his book and how I felt about it, and just kind of wanted my opinion. And I asked him some questions about why he was doing it at the time, because there's a bit of a stigma, particularly on the Army side. Jokingly, there's a lot of SEALs that have written books, and nothing against them, right? Times are changing and the world is different than it used to be. So I'm not downplaying or saying anything bad about that, but there was a bit of a stigma, particularly in our organization, about people writing books. And so I asked Tom some hard questions, and he said, look, man, he said, I think the things that I've been through, and talking about those openly and candidly, can help people just like us, that struggle with some of the same issues, from some of the same trials and tribulations. I think my words and my experiences can help them be okay with theirs, and get professional help if needed, or talk about it or whatever. Like, I think I can make a difference and hopefully reduce, some of these veteran suicides, and hopefully help some of our brothers continue to be successful in the next life. And so anyway, he went on and wrote that book, and I read that book, and that book was fantastic. And he used the proceeds from that book, along with his wife Jen, who wrote one as well, from a completely different perspective, the side of the significant other that's on the other side of the veteran deploying and then post-deployment world. But then the two of them use those resources to start All Secure, and All Secure's focus, which is why I love it, is on the family unit. It's not just the veteran. They very openly and candidly discuss not only post-traumatic stress on the veteran, but secondary post-traumatic stress and how it affects the family and your loved ones and the people around you as you're going through those things and dealing with the aftermath of those things. And so, it was a no-brainer when I was asked to get on board with that organization. They grow every year. 100% of the money that they take in goes towards veteran and veteran families. They do retreats multiple times a year now, where veterans from the community get together, and not just the veterans, but veterans and their spouses. And you know, it's a shared experience. It's some fellowship. There's some education that goes on, and some resources and some research that's provided to help them kind of understand how they feel and why they feel that way, and some tools to get better. And then it's some one-on-one kind of coach, mentor, teach, and some provided therapy and counseling if the veteran and veteran's family wants that. I personally, my wife and I are great, and we have been in regular talks with one of the All Secure provided therapists, basically since I joined the organization. And it's not because we need it, it's because we like it. It's because they're a person that understands our community and the things that we have been through, and how that translates to us now and how we approach the world now. And also they have a fantastic understanding of being the other side of that, of being a spouse and dealing with those. And so it's fantastic. It's a great time for us to share and communicate together as a couple. And I want nothing more than to continue to support that. So hopefully, you know, they will continue to do great things and expand their services. But yeah, I mean, the best thing about All Secure, honestly, besides reducing the stigma of getting help, and then providing those resources, it's that if Tom and Jen don't have the resources or capability to address a veteran or their family's issues, they absolutely will refer you to various organizations that can help you. And I think that's really what spoke to me when Tom and Jen reached out.
Wow, that's amazing. You know, reducing the stigma of getting help. I love what you spoke about spouses and things there as well. And I'm going to get the All Secure book, and more importantly, or doubly importantly, get Jen's book, because when I interviewed Bob Keller, another Delta guy, he talked about his wife, and his wife was actually going back and forth behind him in the show. And I titled that show, "My Wife Didn't Sign Up for This."
It's a good one.
Yeah. And so I think it's unsung heroes. They're so strong. And I'm lucky enough to have Dean Stott's wife, Alana Stott, coming on soon. Dean was SBS and has written a book that's just released in the States called Relentless. And it's going to be really interesting to see from their perspective. And I think it's a story that needs to be told. But what was so clever that you said was that secondary PTSD. That's very little known about. And, you know, if we're in a bad place and we're not presenting as that person, and that, oh, geez, it's hard to say, not physically, but if that spouse is the punching bag, as it were, you know, they're getting the grumpy person, the sad person, and so on. That's heartbreaking, and yeah, not easy to talk about, but it has to be addressed. So really cool that Tom and Jen are doing it together. Really useful for you to speak about, Chris, that you're on that positive journey forward. But definitely, if you want to keep the relationship and it's helpful, is definitely both of you using those resources. So it's great to hear what All Secure is doing.
Yeah, no, it is fantastic. I mean, too many of us have been through scenarios where our careers, our profession, our life events, whatever, have led to divorce, me included. And I, for one, didn't want to do that again.
Yeah.
You know, when you find your person, you know it. And it's your duty and your responsibility to cater, care for, and train that relationship, just like you did everything else in your life, to be as successful as it can be. So it's constant work, just like anything else, just like physical fitness. Like, it takes work. You can't just take it for granted and expect it to always be as good as it was in the beginning. You got to stay focused on it. You got to cultivate it. You got to feed it and nourish it, and it'll be successful just like everything else.
And wise words. Look, I'm going to tie this up. I was going to speak to you about Tier Tactical, but I think the journey we've gone through with this show really sets up a nice tone. I think we're going to leave it there. But I'd like to ask you just actually, I forgot the first question I was supposed to ask you. I'll ask you two questions. The first one is a 2-word check-in. I've been told that the Kiwi accent comes across like chicken, but what it is, Chris, is a 2-word check-in using 2 adjectives, feeling of how you're at now, just checking in where you are today and currently. What would be 2 words that you could provide us with how you're doing now?
Wow, 2 words. I only have 2 words. Can I give you 3 words?
Yeah, man. Yeah, I'm wearing.
Work in progress.
Oh, wow. I love that. That is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, Damien, I have great days, and I have good days, and I still have bad days all these years later. And sometimes it's my spouse that reminds me that I'm slipping and reminds me that I got to do things to get better. Sometimes I catch it myself. But you know, nobody recovers from any of these things and never has a problem again. The key is understanding what it is, and then understanding the things that you can do to reduce it, to mitigate it, or to recover from it. So yeah, work in progress is my cheat.
Good man. Who dares wins. And life isn't linear, is it? I mean, I thought, like I said, transition on Friday to Monday, but you think you're going to go from point A to point B, but it's just not linear. There's ups and downs as long as you're tracking the right way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. As long as you're moving in a positive direction. And you know, when you have setbacks, they're just that. They're setbacks. I've been through much tougher times in my life and came out on the other side of it, and I can do it again. And that's what I remind myself when I do have a setback. So
absolutely. And the last question is, what's your next adventure, your next outdoors adventure for Chris and his better half?
Really soon, yeah. So 2 years ago, I'm gonna make it a long story, but since it's the last question. 2 years ago, my wife and I, you know, we had started doing some bigger summits. We did Pico de Orizaba in Mexico, which is the tallest volcano in North America.
Wow.
We did Cotopaxi in Ecuador and a few other peaks down there. And one of my goals was always to do the 7 summits, you know, the highest point on each continent.
Yep.
And, you know, I've had a lot of injuries over the years, and I know my clock is ticking in terms of physical ability to go do these things. And so 2 years ago, we were supposed to do Mount Elbrus in Russia as our first one. And COVID happened, and then Russia invaded the Ukraine. So it's not exactly the best time to go to the Soviet Union as an American. And then I had some heart issues last year. I'm fine, but some hereditary heart issues, and I had a stent put in one of my arteries coming off my heart. And so I had a little downtime, but we're getting back to it. And so we're going to do the first of our 7 summit attempts here in February. January 31st we leave. We're going to go down and do Kilimanjaro in Tanzania, Africa, and hopefully raise some awareness for some veteran issues, hopefully raise a little money for All Secure to support those veterans and their families, and spend some time in the outdoors and enjoy ourselves doing what we love.
Oh, Kilimanjaro, that sounds amazing. And keep me updated. I'll support it as much as I can. Look, Chris, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. Thank you for taking the patience and time for us to set this up. It's been a few months coming, and it's well worth it.
Yeah, forgive me. I know we've played email tag for months, but I appreciate you. I appreciate what you're doing, and keep up the good work, man. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolute pleasure. I'll let pause to have a chat. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Damien Porter, former Special Forces operator, high performance living coach from hownottodie.com.au. And you can listen to my Straight Talk Mind and Muscle podcast, sponsored by realketonesaustralia.com, the best and most effective ketone supplement on the market to reduce anxiety, enhance brain performance, and supply twice as much energy as glucose. Thanks for watching.